I have assembled about 60 of the brightest minds on the planet, focusing on this class for AI, sports, marketing, and entertainment. And we're just really happy to hear from you. We hope that you can give us a little bit on your background, and then we're all ears to talk about the industry. And I hope we have some time. The teams have some questions, I think, for you.
Okay, good. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I know it's 3:15 on Friday. Normally I might be out playing golf, but today, no. So again, I want to thank Professor for inviting me in today. Hopefully we're going to have some fun. And we'll talk a little bit about my favorite subject, which of course is sports and data. I guess that'd be my favorite subjects. But what I'd like to do is I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to use that as kind of my guide or my my GPS, so to speak. That'll kind of keep me on focus too, because sometimes I get a little bit out of focus, if you know what I mean. So I'm sharing the screen, and hopefully you're seeing an SBRnet big logo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to use a lot of our data today, and I'm going to show off a lot of our data, but in context only. But as Professor said, my name is Neil Schwartz. I am president of SBRnet. It stands for Sports Business Research Network. My background is that I have been in consumer research for over 30 years. I can't believe I say that, but I've been doing research in the sports business for over 25 years. So I am a real veteran when it comes to the business of sports. And over the course of my career, I've been lucky enough to work in a variety of different research applications, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, whether it's been point of sales data, whether it's been, doing in-person interviews, you name it, I've done it. And I've had the chance to work on some unbelievable projects. I've had the chance to work with some unbelievable brands, people you would know, like Under Armour and Crocs and Skechers and On Running, Adidas. I could go on with this. So I've really had a great deal. And I've also worked with teams, leagues, new leagues, old leagues, startup leagues. So I've really been involved in sports in a variety of different ways. What we're going to do today, a little bit about SBRnet and what we do. So we are a provider of data into the sports business. Our primary area is sports fandom. When it comes to understanding the ins and outs, the ups and downs of sports fans, there's really no one that has a better handle on what's going on. We do an annual study every year in Q1, January, measuring habits and behaviors of the trailing 12-month period. It's an internet-based study, sample size over 7,000. And we do what they call, we balance the collection based on, oh God, I hope I get this right, based on age, income, ethnicity, gender, geographic location, presence of children in the household, and I know I forgot something. So it's not unusual for me to forget something. But again, it's an incredible variety, incredible sample of sports fandom data. But before I go on to the next thing, I just want to share something with you about me. So look, I'm an enthusiastic guy. I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of enthusiasm. And as I was telling Professor earlier in the week, there's really 3 words that are the key to why this is. But let me ask you all a question first. How many of you, by show of hands, think that you might want to go into the sports business at some point in your career?
We've got at least 20 people here, Neil. I don't know if you can see maybe more.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. I can't say, that's wonderful. And let me tell you about the sports business. The reason why I am in the sports business, and the reason why I've stayed in the sports business, and the reason why I've succeeded in the sports business comes down to 3 simple words. Sports are fun. If you can't have fun talking about sports, working in the sports business, you know what? Find something else to do. Because I can't tell you, every day when I get up, I have fun talking about the business, whether it's talking about brands, retail, teams, leagues, demographic changes that are going on with sports fans, you name it. I just love the sports business. I could talk about it all day long. I can talk on NIL. How many of you have been keeping up with what's going on with college sports and NIL, name, image, and likeness, and also what's going on with the recent court case? Wild. What's going on with college sports, in my opinion, defies all logic and all common sense. But hey, that's just me. So a little bit about my data. We provide data focused on sports fandom, sports fan intelligence. Again, it's a single source collection instrument. Everything comes from our annual study of sports fans. We cover 19 separate sports across 70 separate categories. We also have sports participation data. That's data that we buy from a third-party provider. We cover 88 sports. So we've got a good handle on that. And then we buy equipment, footwear, and apparel sales data. And again, that's not data I make, that's data I buy. The data I make is focused on sports fans. That's really my area. I've owned this business now for 6 years. Unfortunately, the gentleman that owned it prior to me passed away during COVID. I've known him for a long time in the sports business. So when he passed away, his son reached out to me, and I've owned it ever since. Now, I know this is really small, but the point of this is I want to show you how much data within sports fandom we're covering. There are literally over 70 categories of data that you can look at when it comes to a sports fan, whether it's on attendance, whether it's on viewership, whether it's on social media engagement. You know, what did they buy last year in terms of merch? These are the kinds of questions we ask. Do they travel for sports? Do they travel to support their team? Do they travel to support their family? Do they travel just to go skiing? Well, we get that information too. We currently cover 19 separate sports: professional, college, minor league, team sports, individual sports, women's sports right now, probably one of the fastest growing areas. And as we look at some of the data, you're going to see what's going on with women's sports. It's actually phenomenal. And then we cover 9 consumer brand categories, and we cover it as it relates, again, to sports fans. So we are able to, you know, understand sports and energy drinks and insurance and credit cards, banks, hotels, airlines, things like that. So we provide a comprehensive look at sports fans. Now, Professor, how can we handle questions on an ongoing basis? Can somebody want to raise their hand and just ask a question, or how best do we want to do that?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, the teams have questions for you, but we don't want to steal your fire. So
Okay.
I think we're all good.
Okay.
I'll let you know, if we
Okay.
get close on time in about 10 minutes or so, I'll just remind you.
Okay. All right. So what I did was I sat down today, actually after I got really upset when I watched the game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I'm a Panther fan, and game 1 didn't come out the way I hope it will. But tonight, we're all about redemption. But we live in this data-driven world, and decisions are made using data I find are better decisions. But data's everywhere, and you use it strategically. You can use it in marketing, product development, participation data. You know, I have this weird saying that if people don't play, they don't need to buy. So if you see a sport with declining participation, you know what? Maybe you don't want to make a product for that particular sport. That would not be the case, however, with pickleball. But, we'll get into some specifics maybe later. But again, any decision that includes data, we live in this data-driven world, are better decisions. There's no question about it. But there's a lot of good data, but there's also a lot of bad data. How do you recognize what's what? Well, that sometimes can be a very difficult question to answer. Because what I do with our data, and how do I validate it? I validate it against other data sources. So I take my data and I look at it against Nielsen's data. I look at it against Bloomberg data. I look at it against other data, YouGov, one of my favorites, by the way, to compare against. But again, I'm always looking at, and our data is very timely. It's updated once a year. While I'd love to be able to update it once a month, it's just not feasible. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the discussion between tonnage and trends. I am a trend guy. I don't care how many basketballs a company sold. I don't care really how many pairs of shoes you sold. But what I do care about is, are you growing or are you going? Is your competition doing better than you, or are you doing better than your competition? And looking at the trends, I can't tell you how many times I have sat in meetings with CEOs of big companies from names you have heard of. And it was one that I always love to talk about. It was a baseball company. I sat there, the CEO of the company told me that his bat, this particular bat, was the #1 selling bat in America. I said, okay, where'd you get that information? Well, I was out at Dick's Sporting Goods and I talked to the manager, a few miles away from our office. I said, really? I said, so that's your source. Well, guess what? I showed him that bat wasn't even in the top 5. Now, was he embarrassed a little bit? Yeah. Did I get a little grief about it? You bet. But again, it's looking at data, understanding what you're looking at, and again, looking at tonnage versus trends. Now, the interesting thing about that particular situation is that bat, while not the #1 in terms of sales, was the #1 in terms of growth trends. So it was growing. It just hadn't, gotten to where he thought, it was. And it wasn't even, and stores had a lot of inventory. But when I talk about data also, I talk about working with data, and it's a lot like making soup. And I know that's a goofy analogy. I really do. But when you're using data, don't just rely on one data source. And I try to, as often as I can, to rely on multiple data sources. I recently did a project to determine where to move an ailing NHL franchise. When we did the project and later turned it into a case study, we literally used 5 different data sources, not just mine. We did use mine, but we used 5 different data sources to determine what might be a better home for the Phoenix Coyotes. Oh, I probably shouldn't have said that. Phoenix Coyotes than where they are. And they have, in fact, moved to Salt Lake City. By the way, Salt Lake City was not one of the places that we recommended. We actually recommended Houston #1, Indianapolis #2 as places to where that we felt that the franchise would in fact do the best. But the other thing that's really important is if you only use your own data, and I hear this all the time. I hear this all the time. When we analyze data, we use our own data from our Salesforce platform or our other CRM platform. And I like to say, you know what? I understand using your own data, but let me ask you a question. How are you benchmarked against other teams maybe in your market? How are you benchmarked against other teams in your league? Are you doing better or worse? Yeah, you might be growing. You might be growing fans. You might be growing concession revenue. You might be growing merch revenue. You might be growing all those things. But what happens if the rate of growth is actually below the league, the market average? Well, you run into something that I like to call a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have a lot of like these little goofy analogies and sayings and all that. I guess maybe it comes with being a baby boomer. But again, if you only look at your own data, you are in for a self-fulfilling prophecy. So always remember to bring in multiple sources of data. 1, you can use it for verification. 2, you can use it to present contrary points of view. And 3, you can use it because you might find out something that you didn't from data source 1. But I'm a big soup guy. I'm throwing chicken in, I'm throwing carrots in, I'm throwing celery in, I'm throwing onions in. And then I might sprinkle a little demographic data, or I might sprinkle a little salt and pepper, whatever it might be. But again, don't rely on one source of data. But data for data's sake is really not what you want. I like to talk about using data to help generate insights and then turning those insights into a story. When I talk to my brand customers, and I talk, every once in a while they come to me, they're looking for an analyst, they're looking for, somebody in their marketing, or they're looking for somebody to help them. What are they looking for? They're looking for people that know how to work with data, large data sets, but they're not just looking for people that can run the data, look at the data, produce the data. They're looking for people that know how to generate insights and then take those insights and tell a story, because that's really what it's all about. That's what a CEO wants. If any of you are future CEOs out there, and you are currently CEOs out there, telling a story is really what can really make data fly off the page. And I've seen it work firsthand, to be honest. And I can cite numerous examples. Golf industry is one. I've done a lot in that industry. Tennis, running shoes. I used to do a lot in the footwear category. And I've got the footwear, I've got the shoes in my closet to prove it. I probably am one of the oldest living sneakerheads. I was a sneakerhead before the term was even coined. And I have thinned down my collection because my wife told me that for every new pair I get, I have to get rid of 2. So it's been a slow burn, but literally I have 30 pairs of sneakers in my closet right now, of which a dozen are Jordan collectibles and ones that I'm really proud of. 2 of them I will probably keep. At some point I may sell the rest of them. My daughter wants my most expensive pair. No surprise there. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a little bit of data, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to look at the data. It comes from an online survey done in Q1 every year. It's balanced to reflect the US population 13 years and older, and then 8 to 10 years of historical data. Remember I talked earlier about tonnage versus trends? You need a lot of data to do trends. It's just the way it is. Each sport that I cover, 19 separate sports, there are literally over 300,000 separate data points for each sport. The data gets a little unwieldy at times. It's hard to sometimes wrap your hands or wrap your arms around it. But luckily there's a lot of great packages out there. We use RStudio. I don't know if any of you are familiar, probably are. Yeah. We use Tableau. Tableau's been around a little bit longer, so I'm a little bit more familiar with Tableau. We also were starting to use Power BI from Microsoft. We are a Microsoft shop. We use SQL Server on our back end to house our data. So it made a little bit of sense to try to use Power BI. And we're right now determining which cloud we're going to end up putting all of our data on. I'm leaning in actually to AWS. The problem is that it might present an issue with my Microsoft situation. But we've got an awful lot of data. And then at the end, after I've shown some of the data, you can ask me any question. I'm pretty much of an open book. If I have the answer, I'll give it to you. If I don't have the answer, I'll get it for you. And if you're working on something that you might need a little bit of data for, you know what? Ask me that too. I have been known to say yes. I usually say yes, actually more than I say no. So let's look a little bit at some of the data. Can everybody see this graph on the chart right now?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. This is year over year, 23 to 24, total fandom change for all of the leagues that we measure and all of the sports. Now, we define a fan as somebody who attends at least one game live or watches at least one game via streaming or traditional TV. Right now, streaming TV, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So this graph gives you a quick at-a-glance look at what are the largest sports. It's no surprise. The NFL is the mother of all sports. I mean, they've got almost 180 million Those numbers on the left are millions because it's actually in thousands. So that's not 200,000 at the top, that's 200 million. So the NFL is almost approaching 180 million fans. Their biggest growth, interestingly enough, this year came from women and younger fans. Does anybody have a shot at why?
Taylor Swift.
Yep. Whoever said
Taylor
it,
Swift was said in the room.
Yeah.
I heard it. And that answer's right. And not only that, Taylor has dragged a bunch of other teams with her, not just the Kansas City Chiefs. By the way, what team was commonly referred to as America's team in the NFL?
Patriots.
Who?
Mets.
I can't hear you.
Patriots.
Some say the Patriots, but I think it was DC.
No. America's team, and it was they self-proclaimed themselves this, was the Dallas Cowboys. They had the largest fan base of any NFL team. Guess what? They are no longer America's team. That title now belongs to the Kansas City Chiefs, thanks to Taylor Swift and her relationship with Travis Kelce. But as you can see, if you look at the orange line and the gray line, remember I talked about tonnage? Well, the blue and the red line reflect tonnage. So who's growing in terms of total fans? But look at the trends. I want to take you over to the WNBA. Look at the year-over-year trend. They are growing at close to 60% year-over-year and at about 30% over the last 3-year average. That, to me, is incredibly impressive. Anybody know why WNBA is probably growing?
Caitlin Clark.
That's one of the reasons. Also, April, I forgot her last name all of a sudden. Somebody help me.
Angel.
Angel Reese. Thank you. So, again, you can see from data real quickly which sports are growing, which sports are going. So, interestingly enough, Formula One, we show a slight decline. For 2 years straight, we saw a huge increase. Anybody know why Formula One might be up in the United States with fans?
Because of the new races, Miami.
That's one, but there's a second reason. Any of you guys watch Netflix Drive to Survive?
Yeah.
It has driven a lot of fandom increases. But what we're also seeing is that NASCAR has been on almost a 3-year decline. IndyCar has been on a 3-year flat. So again, it's looking at and understanding what's going on from both a tonnage and a trend standpoint. I like to use the term trendage, but I was informed by one of my interns that that's not really a word. And I've kind of known that forever, but I use it anyway. So again, looking at the different sports, understanding what's growing, MLS was having a great run. Things have calmed down for the MLS. Why did the MLS have a good, let's say, couple of years for a while? Anybody want to take a quick one at that one?
Messi.
Messi joining the MLS was a big deal. But once things calm down, they calm down. What's going to be very interesting is that international soccer is going to be very interesting. In 2 years, the World Cup is going to be played in a combination of, I think I have it right, you're going to see it in Mexico, the United States, and Canada, with the finals, quarterfinals, semis, and finals all played in the United States. I will be willing to bet you that you will see an incredible jump in international soccer fandom when that occurs. The last time there was the World Cup, something happened that I never saw happen in all the years I've been tracking sports. 1, television viewing went way up. 2, participation went way up. And 3, sales of equipment, shoes, footwear, apparel went way up. So the only thing that was unique is that their World Cup was being played. So this is live game attendance. And this is always an interesting one. Because look at Formula One. We talked about the growth of Formula One, and their year-over-year change in attendance has been phenomenal. WNBA is still leading when it turns to the trend. the year-over-year trends. But again, when you look at tonnage, the Major League Baseball actually does more fans than the NFL. Anybody know why that might be?
More games.
162 games versus 17, plus the playoffs, plus, that. It's just a matter of tonnage, more games. That's why I like to tell people, don't just focus on tonnage. Focus on the trends. I will tell you, look at the attendance. College football has been growing. NHL has been growing. There's a lot of growth in live attendance. Now, remember one thing. This is still coming off of what they call the pandemic hangover. I did not measure live attendance in 2020. I made a conscious decision not to do that. Because when we saw what was happening, we realized we were going to destroy the trends, and I just did not want to do that. We look at viewership also. So here, year over year, 3-year average, no surprise, the NFL is the #1 league when it comes to viewership. But again, the WNBA, year over year had the biggest climb and the biggest 3-year average. But other leagues also are showing nice growth. They're not the only one. But, we look at it, look, and the conversation is, I hear people talking and making a lot of claims out there. And I like to say, where is that data coming from? How are you making those claims? So again, what we're seeing is year over year sports viewership trends. And what's happening is that a lot of the slack that's being lost by traditional viewing is being taken up by streaming. How many of you, when you do watch sports, now prefer to watch via streaming over, let's say, traditional cable or satellite? Me.
Yeah, most.
How are we doing around the room? Most of them? Yeah, that's, and that's not different than, what we see happening, across most sports, across most teams. Some teams are doing a little bit better in streaming because they are using more localized streaming networks, or they're using, Apple. I will tell you the interesting phenomenon 2 years ago when Amazon first decided that they were going to broadcast Thursday Night Football, somebody reached out to me and said, did I think it was going to be a great idea? I said, absolutely. They said, why do you think that? I said, because it's not just about them growing viewers, it's about them growing Amazon Prime customers. Just imagine every time they grew a new viewer, they became an Amazon Prime customer. When Peacock decided to broadcast their first NFL playoff game 2 years ago between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins, I am a Miami Dolphins fan. It was a rough night for me, but the Peacock experiment proved it again. Yeah, they drew a huge number. They got a lot of new subscribers, but they ended up holding on to about 30% of them. Because everybody said, oh, they'll buy Peacock and then they'll cancel. You're right, 70% did that, but 30% didn't. So net, they ended up growing that business. And now what are you seeing? Well, Apple TV is into sports. Amazon is increasing. Netflix is now doing sports. Paramount, it's hard to name a network anymore, streaming or otherwise, that is not somehow showing live sports. Live sports is a huge moneymaker. No question about it. Yeah.
Neil, I just want to be protective of your time. So we have about 15 minutes left.
Okay.
Everyone's at the edge of their seat, so this is awesome. But just want to make sure we have some time for Q&A.
I just want to get down to the last these little things here real quickly. The girls are on fire. There's no question about it. And there's a lot of great opportunities for brands, for advertisers, for growing fandom, all of that. Take me out to the ball game or any game, really. Fans are going out to games. Even though it's very expensive to go to a live sporting event, people are still going. And that's a good thing. And then, of course, the new revenue streams, streaming. So there's a lot of great things going on in the sports business. I want to thank Professor Lynch for inviting me in again. I know that we want to leave a lot of time for questions. If you want, I know a couple of you have already reached out to me on LinkedIn. That's cool. I'm a pretty open book. There's my contact information. If you want to reach out to me directly, I would please ask that you probably not call me, maybe to use email. If you need some data, I'm always happy to give a little, can't give a lot because that would interrupt my business model. But so again, I want to thank you. I know it's three. I thank you. What else can I say?
Neil, it's just really amazing. One thing before we open up to the floor, do you think that the same fans are just watching more content, or are we picking up new fans are watching more of that content?
So I think the answer is, is both. But I do think that we did an interesting study, a generational kind of look at sports fandom, where we looked at all the same components, not just by league, but by team. But we are seeing something going on with like Gen Z younger fans. They're not going to games. They are not attending games live. And what they are streaming in buckets. And they are utilizing YouTube like never before. So we're seeing younger fans coming into the fold. They're just coming in a different way.
Yeah.
Their way of consuming sports is different than mine.
Okay, if you stop sharing your screen in the room here, we'll see your beautiful face because we want to be able to see you. And
okay, I'm doing it right now. Give me a second.
I think the teams have some questions. We have 10 minutes left, so we need to be sharp. Who's taking the first question here? Loud and proud.
My question is, how do you kind of like select, if you're a company, if you're a sports company and let's say you want to delve or expand into a new city, how can you quantify the kind of like spirit of that sports? Because it's something that's quite hard to get. Even for example, if a city is growing, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're willing to follow sports or baseball. How do you quantify that feeling?
There's really three ways we do that. Number one is in the case where we were doing this study with the Phoenix Coyotes. One of the things we looked at was fandom across other sports. We looked at football, we looked at college football, we looked at basketball, we looked at baseball. We looked at all of the different levels of engagement of sports fans. Because number one, how many fans are there that you can draw from? And that was really important. Number two is we built a model of the fan of the previous city and then benchmarked that against the average fan for that particular sport. So again, we took the data, we created profiles, and then benchmarked it against the norm or the average. And that was the way that we were able to determine why Houston was the choice would have been the number one choice for the Phoenix Coyotes, and the second choice would have been Indianapolis.
Neil, one of the balances that we're talking about, this is such an awesome point, is despite that you have the data, all the leagues have been going through this, do you go on the gut and the traditional talent, or do you trust the data? So here you're telling us the Phoenix Suns were told, or the Phoenix Coyotes were told based on the data, go over here, and they went there. So
money talks. I'm doing a similar project right now. Formula One wants to decide, and I'm not telling anything out of school here. Formula One wants to decide they want to put a fourth race here in the United States. It's as simple as that. This is the most important market for them, growth market. Where? Currently got a race in Texas and Austin. They've got a race in Vegas, street race, and they've got a race here in Miami. I live in Boca Raton, Florida. So they wanted to go to Chicago. Great idea. Chicago said no. We do not want these cars on our streets. They reached out to other markets, like they reached out to New Jersey, as in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. New Jersey said no. Because they just they've got enough traffic problems. They don't want to have to clog everything up for 5 weeks, 6 weeks while they build a racetrack, put the stands up, do everything that gets done. But there are markets where that may or may not make sense because there's not a lot. There may not be the most fans, but there might be the most money. Yeah. And right now, private equity is throwing all kinds of money around like their cookies.
Well,
And
isn't it true? I mean, this is one of the only ways to get a dedicated audience anymore. You can't do broadcast TV and get that same market. You get a follow-up? And then we're going over here. Yeah.
So how do you get that data in the first place? Because a lot of those institutions are private, so how can you access it?
well, remember one thing, we're doing a complete internet-based consumer study on our own. I am not getting data from any teams or any leagues or any third-party organizations for our fandom data. I make the data. So I use a nationally representative panel from a nationally recognized company. And we have set these we use what they call quota-based sampling. I don't know if you got into any of that, and by the way, we can talk about the merits of that all day long. But again, if you get into a methodology question, you're going to be in deep doo-doo. But the data all comes from our consumer study, and then it is weighted to reflect the total population. So again, I'm not getting data from the New York Mets or the New York Yankees or the New England Patriots. I'm creating my own data.
We have another question in the room. I want to make sure we get to as many as possible. We're on the
Sure.
clock.
Go.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks for connecting on LinkedIn as well. This is Gift. I wanted to just ask, how do you deal with legacy individuals? These are people that still have traditional beliefs about soccer or any type of sport, really, and basically convincing them to believe in science and slowly move away from tradition. I ask that particularly because we all doing MBAs, and I'm just wondering if maybe you could share, as well as we are about to go into the industry, if there are some insights that we should be sharing to try and convince someone that totally believes in tradition.
Look, it's an interesting question because you know what, it's going to be hard. It's hard to change. I think some ingrained aspects of sports fandom. I mean, fans from Argentina, people that come here from Argentina are probably going to be fans of Argentina when it comes to international soccer. But the MLS, didn't just kind of throw their arms up and say, we're not going to be able to grow our fans. They have, you want to talk to people that you feel are most likely going to want to come to your stadiums. You're going to understand what is it going to take to get those fans to come to my stadium. And then what do I do to keep them coming, keep them watching, understanding, what drives those fans. I mean, typically like with Hispanic families, they typically like to do things as a family. Well, if you're charging $100 a ticket to go see Inter Miami, that might be a little prohibitively expensive. So they have figured out ways in order to package things to make it easier for specific groups to be able to attend a sport that they are most aligned with. But
I just want, Neil, to build on this a bit. So I think that that's sage advice on the different strategies. There's another layer to this question. How do you convince somebody who's not going to think about relying on data to help them make a decision? If they have a tradition of just making decisions on their own, from your perspective, what works? Can you convince them to listen to the data?
Well, that's an interesting question because sometimes I personally feel like I'm a data evangelist. And what I find generally is people will do more to avoid pain than they will to seek pleasure. And I believe there is a hardened psychological philosophy, that goes with that people will do more to avoid pain than they will pleasure. Find the pain. And that's what I've always done. And sometimes it can be a little contentious. Sometimes it can be a little difficult. Sometimes you can rub people the wrong way. God knows I've rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But find the pain and then show them how data will help them heal the pain.
Sage advice. Another question from the room? We've got 5 minutes. We've got lots of hands. 1, 2, right? Okay. 1, 2.
Hi, Neil. Thank you for taking the time. My name is Wagner.
My pleasure.
I was wondering with the data you showed for the MLS with the whole Messi effect, what do you think the next, I mean, what have you seen as the next trends for the MLS and why do you think those are the way that they are?
Well, here's what's going to happen. First of all, I did this thing when Messi first came to Miami. I did an analysis of what I thought was going to happen. Now, I try not to make predictions. An old boss of mine used to get on my case all the time. He's like, dude, you got to stop doing that. You're going to get yourself in trouble. And God knows I have. But you know what? I don't care. I'm going to say what I want to say. And if I'm right, I'm right. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And my track record's been pretty good. But you know what I did? Here's what I did, an interesting thing. I love to model things. And here's what I did. When Messi came to Inter Miami, what I did was I looked at the numbers, what happened when Messi went from Barcelona to PSG, Paris Saint-Germain. And I modeled what was going to happen with Inter Miami, what I thought was going to happen with Inter Miami, and then the rest of the league in terms of growth and all that. And I actually spoke to somebody on my podcast called My First Job in Sports, and I asked him about that. And he said, your numbers were pretty darn close. He said, you know, we anticipated about a 20% leap in fans, in attendance, and that's about what they got. So, you know, I love to model things. The big model is going to be, I can't see you, but what's your first name?
Wagner.
The big challenge is going to be to model what's going to happen with the World Cup in 2 years. This will be, in my opinion, one of the biggest things to occur in the United States in a sports situation in quite some time. Hopefully it's not going to get wrecked, but
We got one more question
Go.
here, so make it quick.
What would be the previous World Cup you would use to model the one that is coming up right now?
when, what, wasn't it 4 years ago?
Which World Cup would you
Whatever
use?
where was the last World Cup?
The last World Cup, Qatar, 2022.
Right. And I think, and the United States qualified for that one, correct? Am I not correct?
Yeah,
That
but
was the big key to growing soccer here in the US. The United States team qualified. So all of a sudden, kids were going out and buying USA soccer jerseys. All of a sudden, kids were staying up late or staying up to watch the USA soccer matches. All of a sudden, parents were sitting with their kids. All of a sudden, kids said, hey, mom and dad, I may not want to play basketball, but I want to go out and play soccer. That's what happened.
Okay.
We got one more in the room.
thank you.
Keep going.
Very much for your response now, and thank you for your presentation. We have talked so much about how AI, can enhance the data analytics. But, I just want to ask more about the content creation. So how can you really ensure that the content generated by AI can be liked, by the consumers who are liked by the audience? Because sometimes we try to highlight some key point that you think, So this is a question.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, we as a company are just getting into machine learning and using AI to be able to spot trends and be able to spot certain things. I actually just used machine learning and AI to develop a brand new KPI. And that's what I think, that's for me, is what I think you're going to see AI really be a really incredible tool, because, we'll be able to throw the data into the AI engine, and I forgot what we use for it, and then let it churn out different models and different options, and then keep. Look, let me just say one thing. Everybody's AI. It's the flavor of the month. It's like Rocky Road ice cream. But the human factor is not going away. They are going to need people like you. Well, maybe not so much people like me anymore because I'm a baby boomer, but they're going to need people like you to drive this and to make some sense out of it, and to turn this into something that makes sense and tell a story. That's what they're going to need, and that's what you need to do. And that's what's going to make, some of you sitting right here are probably going to be, CEOs or general managers or, chief financial officers. So, it's right there for you.
Neil, I cannot think of a stronger point to end on. The teams are focused on exactly this challenge over the next 2 days. It's such a fast class. I am so inspired by your lessons learned and wisdom here. I think everyone will agree. And we're gonna replay this back and think about what you shared with us today to make these projects even better. So join me in thanking Neil.
Thank you very much for having me in. Thank you very much for the consideration. As I said, if you want to get some data, I'm happy to give a little. Can't give a lot. That interrupts my business model. So thank you, everybody, and have a good rest of the weekend. And
Neil,
go
thank you so much. Really
Go
appreciate it.
Panthers.
Cheers.
You bet. All right, I'm going.
Wow.